done 38 episodes this year. Can you believe that?
Wow.
And so we thought, why hide the gems from some of our past episodes? Why not, pick some of our favorite moments and things that have resonated with us over time and share them with this audience? Hello, welcome to Chai Across Generations. This podcast is for anyone who wants to explore or improve their relationship with their culture, their relationship with their loved ones and other generations, and ultimately, their relationship with themselves. Shankar and I are on this journey, and we're excited that you're joining us today as we do a 2023 recap episode. We'll chat about some of our favorite lessons and ideas from the year so far. Shankar, how are you?
Hey, doing pretty well, Nikhil. How about yourself?
I'm good. We've done 38 episodes this year. Can you believe that?
Wow. And that's quite a bit. And thank you for carrying the flag there.
Well, yes, there were some times where, maybe I leaned in a bit, but overall we've done so many of these together. And so we thought, why hide the gems from some of our past episodes? Why not, pick some of our favorite moments and things that have resonated with us over time and share them with this audience? So I think that's what we're hoping to do here.
Yeah, I think it was a great idea because also it helps you kind of reflect and take stock of our journey this year. And
yeah.
So I think we'll kick it off, right? Are you going to lead us off?
Let's do it. So our first clip is from episode 6, the first part of our mental health series. Shankar shares a really interesting analogy for mental health that I and many of our listeners have found really helpful. Do you think then that we do a disservice in how we speak about mental health today, or how we, maybe the popular perception of it, or do you think it captures both sides of the coin?
I do think in modern times, there is a sense when we talk about mental health that it's negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I thought of an analogy here that might explain, if you'll permit me to go a little
of course,
longer into
yes.
this. Yeah. So we know that there's a spectrum, right? When we talk about mental health, we always think of this spectrum. And this suddenly struck me. I have an analog clock. You remember the old clocks where you actually have numerals? It's like 12 on top and then
right.
1, 2, 3, going all the way around clockwise. And the way I think of it is that let's take the first quadrant, 12 to 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think of that quadrant, you may say, is pathological mental disease, in the sense that this person is unable to conduct the activities of daily living. They may be a threat to their own physical well-being, to the physical well-being of others. And without supervision, this person is not capable of functioning, taking care of their body itself. Mm-hmm. Right? So think of it from 12:01 to 3, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I feel this is a very... that person's reality has become very, very individualized so that it doesn't intersect much with the reality of people around them, right? Beyond 3, I think you get into what I call the functional, but could still have personality disorders. There can be very highly functional people who have very different kinds of personality disorders, right? So I think of 3 to 6, right, mm-hmm. going down. You come to 6 to 9, I think of, again, functional people. They are able to share the reality of those around them, and they're probably very successful, and they're kind of trying to, but that's not the end. You're trying to grow. You're trying to mm-hmm. maybe expand your spirituality, or what's the purpose of life? Ask the big questions, expand your circle of concern to the whole world, right? And I think from 9 to 12, you sort of get into the realm of philosophers, saints, holy men, people whose consciousness is expanded to a superconscious state. And so then you come all the way up to 12. Now, the interesting thing is 11:59 to 12:01 are very close.
Yeah.
Right? The way
right.
that a spiritually realized person behaves is barely a sliver away from the way a madman behaves.
That's interesting.
Right.
Did you come up with this clock analogy?
Yeah.
Or wow. You better copyright it or trademark it, Shankar, before someone else takes it. It's beautiful. Do you think the gap is actually very small between 11:59 and 12:01?
Yes, I think it is peculiarly, but it's very different in the sense, in one case, that person's consciousness has expanded to encompass everything. It's huge. And in the other case, it's like a point. It's like a singularity. You know, you did engineering, didn't you at some point?
I did some computer science, if that
Oh,
counts.
right. So we have this thing of a delta function, right? Like a
Right.
point where it, and so I think that on one hand it's like the point, and the other person is like looking out at infinity. And I actually have an anecdote to share with you. So my dad used to tell me about this person. So there was a person called Sheshadri Swamigal in Arunachala, which is in South India, Tamil Nadu. And Sheshadri Swamigal was a realized soul, was the feeling. He's a person who had attained infinite. But his day-to-day behavior was completely random. He would come out onto the street and he would laugh and say, oh, there's somebody going there. And he would go and push somebody's, there would be various peddlers, vendors selling fruits and vegetables and all kinds of stuff. You know how it is in India, if you particularly in the rural areas. And he would just go and knock a peddler's cart. And that person would not be angry with him because the general feeling was that that day that person would have an amazing sales. It would just like break all records. Right? Now, I don't know about the veracity of that legend, if you may question that. But within society, people were accorded that sort of liberty of this kind of seemingly extreme antisocial behavior, which, on the other hand, obviously he did some other things and said some other truths that maybe made people feel much better and realized or educated them, enlightened them, which may not have been there if somebody was just, unfortunately on that other spectrum at 12:01. But I definitely remember these kind of instances. Even Sri Ramakrishna, who is, so well known all over the world, right? And there's so many missions in his name.
Yeah.
His behavior was, if you were to analyze it by DSM-4, they may say that this guy is pathologically insane. But that was not the case. But that was not the case, right?
Right. So let me ask you this, like, what I'm thinking about if I look at myself, there are moments today, right? There are moments where I have some anxiety, let's say about something at work, something comes up, and I will do something like meditate, right? Or take a moment away, step outside to get some fresh air, come back. What I wonder is, as I try to move away from anxiety or to control my anxiety, I actually end up running toward calmness, right? Or a sense of feeling at peace.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, where does that fall on your clock from 12 to, go ahead, from 1 to 12?
I love it because that's exactly the point I was thinking. Right? So I think we are not stuck at one point on the clock, is what I believe. I believe that through the day we swing everywhere. But probably you're not swinging into the 12 to 3 yet because you're able to control it and bring yourself back into the functional space, is my feeling. I completely agree with you. To me, this opened up my heart to have a lot of sympathy and compassion for people who are mentally ill. It can be very trying, and I know that from personal experience, to be caring for someone who is mentally ill or who is, has a personality disorder or something like that. But when we actually sit and calm ourselves down, it's just compassion, because sometimes I'm maybe having an oscillation on that side of the clock at some point.
Right. Yeah. Would you define mental illness as a certain segment of the clock, or do you think it extends to multiple parts of the clock?
So, that's a powerful question, and it depends on who you talk to. This is again, so in our spiritual tradition, there's actually a belief that to be anywhere other than 11:59 or 12 o'clock is illness.
Hmm.
So to be sunk in the world is called bhavarogam. Bhavarogam, rogam is illness.
Hmm.
So all the super functional people who are charging around and being highly successful at work are mentally ill according to a spiritual, from a spiritual perspective.
Hmm.
And that really turns stuff on its head, right?
Right.
And I think it's powerful because we think, oh, this person is so normal. And that
Right.
always brings to my mind this beautiful quote from Lewis Carroll, where, one of the characters runs around and says, I'm mad, you're mad, we're all mad.
Hmm.
And that's what
Yeah.
he's trying to say. We're all just in
Yeah.
different degrees of madness. So that can open our hearts to stop stigmatizing this, for God's sake. Next up, keeping with the theme of mental health, we have a clip from episode 35 with Abhijit, co-founder of Manmukti, a South Asian mental health organization. Abhijit spoke very candidly and honestly about his own mental health journey. So let's give it a listen. What has your experience been talking about mental health? Let's say your own family and friends.
Yeah, let's get into it. I'm dealing with this hardcore over the past few weeks, really since the time I first had an intro chat with Nikhil. So if I'm going to apologize in advance if I get a little emotional, but I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah, it's it's still really tough to talk about it, whether it's family that are older generation or even whether it's friends in my own generation. I don't find the experience to be that much better in my current generation. I would say that my generation has picked up a lot of attitudes around the idea of strength and resilience, that older generations have done a great job of teaching us. I think they've picked it up and turned it into a mind frame of what what you could term today as something like toxic positivity. You are dealing with something like depression. Um, don't worry about it. We all go through sadness. Like you're gonna be fine. Hey, it's fine. These are the ups and downs of life. You're totally gonna get through this, man. Like I believe in you. Okay, that's nice, but I could fucking think about that myself. Like when
Right? Yeah.
when and I'm dealing with this because I've been I've had depressive episodes for the past over a year and a half. They've become really bad in the past year, let's say, and really acute in just the last month or two since last talked to Nikhil. And so I'm hearing these things and talking with family and friends frequently. I started going to therapy recently. And when I talk to my therapist about some of my experiences talking to friends and receiving some of this, mindset of it's fine, you're going to get through it, not a big deal. Um, I had internalized this feeling of wondering, am I susceptible to something like depression because I am weak? And somebody else who's telling me that it's okay, I'm going to get through it, they're just mentally stronger than me. And that, I genuinely thought that. I believed that in my heart. And something the therapist helped me realize was when we go through things like this, they manifest in so many different ways. I'm somebody who's always been super duper emotional and sensitive. Um, so when I go through something like this, I really feel it for what it is. It's sadness. It's curling up in a fetal position and crying until I just feel like I can't cry anymore. I've had those moments very recently. um, and I'm able to like go through that emotion as it's sort of in whatever way it's like sort of coming into me. It feels like I'm receiving it exactly at that point and like letting it manifest in me as sadness and dealing with it as sadness and letting that flow and hopefully coming out of it the next day. There's many people who receive those sorts of negative emotions, the depression, and they immediately run away because they're not quite comfortable dealing with the emotion of it. Maybe they're just not super emotional people. They're not comfortable even looking inside and figuring out what that emotion means. And my therapist is a family and marriage therapist. And she was saying that, you can go through it as sadness now and, figure it out and, learn, or it can result in your marriage breaking apart 20 years from now because you've stifled so many things for so long. And so I think in our community, there's a lot of people who would do the latter, stifle things, run away from them, and turn to other ways of coping that are not healthy, but are seen as not depression. India has, I think, some of the lowest rates of people taking antidepressants in the world. But I'd like to know what the numbers are for how many alcoholics we have. I'd like to know what the numbers are for how many people we have who beat their family, their children, or their wives. I'd like to know what the numbers are for how many people are just worrying and anxious all the time, right? These things manifest in so many different ways within us as people. And when somebody is just going through it in the way that I am, it's hard for people who don't go through it the same way as me to understand. That was a lot, but hopefully that answers the question and there's a little bit of how I'm feeling these days.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was everything and more. And I just so commend you for being open about it. And in the spirit of transparency as well, I've been going to therapy for 5 years now, following a very tough stretch in my life personally. And when I heard you speak, what I was just thinking is therapy is strength, right? Like you are deciding to get some assistance from a professional on something that will help you, like you said, for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Like we go to doctors for the same thing physically. I don't see much of a difference at all. So I just hope, I consider your story and what you just shared as strength. And I'm just very moved at the moment. Shankar, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I commend you for your vulnerability because vulnerability is courage, actually. So, in fact, we first frame that fear of, talking about mental well-being or mental health or mental illness. It's typically framed as a weakness, but actually, vulnerability is not weakness. It's only very strong people who can allow themselves to be vulnerable. And I think that's something that we miss a lot. And I don't see it as weakness. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to stand up and say that. So from mental health, we'll move on to lessons on communication between parents and kids. Nikhil shared a story in episode 11 on talking to his parents about a tough topic and what he and his parents learned from the experience back in our communication series.
I was talking to my parents this week, not about a social issue, but about a challenging situation in a different part of my life. And there's not a lot to be done in this situation. It's just kind of a waiting game, and it's just a kind of waiting to see how things play out. Mm-hmm. So I'm in this space where for the next week or two, I'm just kind of waiting to see how things turn out. There's a lot of kind of nerves and anxiety in the air. So when I was talking to them, I was telling my parents about the situation, and I was just feeling kind of down about it, right? It's a tough situation for me and a lot of people around me. And I just wanted to feel through those feelings. But in that conversation, my parents initially, they wanted to make me feel better. That protective instinct came out, right? That love came out in that way, and they were surfacing kind of positives that were going on, other things that were positive in that area. But I couldn't hear it, right? Because what I wanted was just to be heard and not, I didn't think there was anything to fix. I feel like things will be fine at the end of the situation, but I'm just sitting in it right now and I just want someone to hear me. Yeah. And so this interaction went on for a little while. And at one point in the interaction, I felt like that my parents wanted to offer, these kind of pieces of these stories from their own lives, right? Of of when they'd been in something similar or whatever else. And while their points were correct, I was not in the space to receive it. And what I wish had happened was, since I was kind of in a tough place at the beginning of the conversation, I wish they had maybe asked something along the lines of, how can we help? Right? Because there's like advice giving and there's just listening. And I actually, so that we ended that interaction. Didn't feel great about it. Typically, I would have just thought, okay, bad interaction, that's fine. Wash it away. I'll talk to them later. But actually, I have to credit this podcast, and I have to credit our listeners for this too. And I have to credit you for this. The next day, I kind of thought, I need to go back to them. I need to check in with them on this conversation. Because if we're sitting here talking about intergenerational conversations and trying to improve our relationship, I need to do some of that myself. So I talked to them the next day, and I asked them, how do you think that conversation went? I was just curious what they thought. And actually, it turns out they had done some reflecting, the two of them together, after that conversation. And then they were sharing back with me. They said, I think you were looking for something different in that conversation than what we gave to you. And my mom made this point where she said, I wish I had asked you, are you looking for advice or are you looking to be heard? Right? Which is great. A great kind of realization. And it would have really helped me. I was happy. I wasn't perfect in this conversation by any means. I'm sure I could have done better as well. But we talked about this idea, my parents and I, that I want to bring here, which is that I think for my parents' generation, for your generation, especially coming from India, it is not normal or an easily learned behavior to ask questions of your kids during some of these conversations, right? The impulse is, if they're struggling, let me try to help them, right? Let me offer some advice. Let me offer an opinion. I don't want to see them hurt or in pain. And that's a great instinct, and it's oftentimes correct. But sometimes, maybe you can help me out here, but the power of the question, if you can incorporate questioning as a parent or as a child, but in this case, for my parents, if you can incorporate questioning as a parent, it will open up a ton of conversations with your kids.
Great points. I think when I've encountered older people and presented something to them, shared an experience, I've never felt good when they've tried to fix it.
Right. Yes. Beautifully said.
And as an engineer, I realize I also like to fix things.
Right.
But somehow, very luckily with my daughter, I've learned to first sit with it before and perhaps I realize there is a hubris in actually thinking I can fix anything, because I respect that she's an adult. She's a fully functioning adult. She has all the intelligence she needs to take the right decisions, right? And I realized this very, very early on when she was very young. So I've been lucky in that one respect. I don't think I'm that good with other people, but with her, I'm somehow all right.
That's
probably
wonderful.
Even with my parents, I try to fix. I might try to fix something for my mom, right? But in that respect, I'm lucky. But there is also something that I learned from our podcast, which I was not doing very well, which is being a professor. And as you all guys, and our listeners know, I have a tendency to go into long, voluble theories and have an opinion on everything. It's the worst thing about being an academic is they have an opinion on anything and everything, regardless of whether they
The worst
know.
or the best, Shankar, I'm not sure.
Regardless of the depth of our knowledge, we'll be happy to venture an opinion on something.
That's why I like asking questions to you. I know you'll have something to come back to me on.
Right? So sometimes I have launched off on some theory without fully listening to my daughter. And she'd get upset, and we would, it's palpable, right? Emotionally, I can see that. But the nice thing is, we'd always come back, and the fact that we do love each other very much, and we'll reopen it, right? So I'll ask, okay, so I'm sorry, I think it seems like you're upset. What's the deal? And we go through it again. So just like you said, and eventually it comes out. So we're able to listen. I'm able to listen. Primarily, it's most often it's I am the one who's not doing the listening, and I'm not too proud to admit that, and it works out then. So then I listen and I'm able to see her viewpoint. And here's the other interesting thing. I have learned that you can understand even if you don't agree.
Right.
So at the end of the conversation, it does not mean that I agree with her necessarily. We can still agree to disagree respectfully, and I can understand that her lens is different, her perspective is different, her life is different, the things she's experiencing are different. And we say provisionally, and she's given me a great compliment when she says, I do respect the fact that you have a lot more experience. And so I'm not going to discard your opinion in the trash. I'm going to keep it as provisionally a useful perspective that I may revisit in some form down the line. But right now, it's not something that I'm able to accept, and it doesn't gel with my interpretation of reality as I see it. And to me, that's progress. I mean, that's huge. I'm just happy with that.
Yeah.
That's totally, I'm good enough with that.
Yeah. And finally, we talked to Ajanta and Vivek about raising multicultural kids in episode 38. Here's their really thoughtful perspective on what it really means to raise multicultural kids in today's day and age.
Learning about a culture has to be fun. If you make it a chore where you say, well, you were born Indian, you must know everything about my culture, you must learn the traditions the way I did it, that doesn't work. It becomes a chore. They do it as long as they feel they're forced to. And then the moment they can disconnect, they completely disconnect. Maybe they revisit it later in life once they have their own kids, but until then, there is this huge gap. But if you make it exciting, if you make a child wanting to show off to their classmates, for example, on this cool festival that they celebrate, now you've gotten it. Now you're hitting the mark, which is why if you see, so many of the books in our series are all about festivals. Festivals are one of the best gateways to celebrating, to learning about a culture, because which kid doesn't like celebrating, right? Like they only talk about their birthday like the entire year because the kids love essentially celebrating. But the one thing that I also mention is that it's great. Our first desire is always, especially as somebody who's an immigrant, like for us, we were not born and raised in this country. We came here as completely grown adults. And for us, it's really important. Oh my gosh, my child better know about my culture. What we forget though, is that it's equally important for them to know about other cultures as well. And that doesn't come naturally. It's not something you have a deep desire from the inside always to like, this is a gap I must fill. So you really have to make the effort. Are you excited about your food? Guess what? The person who's from a different part of the world is equally excited about theirs. Would you have an open mind? Would you want to learn about them? Go look at all the events, and there's so many free events everywhere now, right? Just go on social media or just Google up events that are happening that specifically are done by different cultures, and make sure to attend all of them, because each time you learn. And the best thing, and I'm kind of giving you a very long response to a small question, but one of the best things that happens is that kids are very good in identifying commonalities. So you take them to an event, right away they will start mixing and matching and joining the dots between their culture and the culture they're visiting. And that is what truly multiculturalism is, right? It's not just about I am different, you're different, we coexist, but it's like, no, we're actually tied by these common elements, and we can coexist in a beautiful, thriving, joyful way. That happens when they go beyond just their own culture and they start to connect these dots. To me, that's like the best feeling of being able to see that and seeing that child have this open mind, have this big perception that the world is a very big and varied place and there are so many different ways to live. Okay, that's all.
I have nothing more to add.
So those are some of our favorite lessons from this past year. You can go back and check out any of the back catalog. I find a lot of them are still quite relevant to my life, and we'll link the specific episodes we mentioned today in the show notes.
Yeah, Shankar, as I was going through some of these, I found a lot of those lessons still relevant to me today. So we want to thank all of our listeners for listening this year. It's been a wonderful ride. We're just getting started here, and we're excited to continue the journey with all of you in 2024. Subscribe to us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube, and reach out to us over email at chaiacrossgenerations@gmail.com. And on Instagram and YouTube, you can find us at Chai Across Generations.
We'll see you all next time.